I am so excited to have Dr. Margarita Calderon back on the podcast. This is the third time she's back on the podcast. And one of our new favorites, Dr. Hector Montenegro, on the podcast. They will both be talking about their newest book called Empowering Long-Term English Learners with Social Emotional Learning and Language and Literacy. You've got me both at really three times at working with long-term English learners, social emotional learning, and language and literacy. I know this is going to be a book that teachers are going to love. Dr. Calderon and Dr. Montenegro, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Tan. It's always a pleasure being here with you, and we look forward to your questions and your guidance. And yes, we love this book, so we're ready to roll, right, Hector?
Absolutely. It's fantastic. People just love it. And it's really impacting a lot on the practice right now.
Well, before we get to the book, could you give us a context of your current projects or work?
Sure, sure. I am currently working with 29 schools, 19 in North Carolina and 10 in Texas. My team is helping me out. Hector is one of my team members. But what we do is we train teachers at a school. So we go school by school by school. And at each school, we started out with vocabulary. You're familiar with the 7 steps. So we're teaching them the 7 steps, discourse, and what vocabulary really does in terms of reading comprehension. And then after we train the teachers at a school, we coach all of them. All of them. So there are 4 coaches at a school at the same time on the same day. All of this is virtual, of course. Yeah, it's all virtual. So that's what I'm currently working on.
Yeah. It's been a wonderful experience to integrating the social and emotional aspect. I've been working with CASO, that's a collaborative for academic and social emotional learning, for over 10 years, and work with both large scale district implementation as well as school and even within the classroom. And partnering with Margarita in language and literacy is just a perfect fit, because we can't divorce and separate the social and emotional aspect from learning. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. But I also have several projects that I do nationally and internationally, specifically focusing on developing curriculum, implementation strategies, pedagogy regarding the explicit instruction of social emotional learning, and especially with Margarita, the integration in language and literacy.
I think we're going back to Dr. Krashen's work where he talked about effective filter. Like, we can't just teach language development. It went without students' buy-in, without students feeling comfortable. So your book is perfectly connected to a foundational work of Dr. Krashen. Let's talk about, can I ask you to both share stories from your practice that has really impacted your practice today?
Well, I'm going to tell you that there's just a number of experiences that we both have had, both directly in the classroom as well as large-scale venues and presentations. Recently, I worked with a district outside of Chicago, and their ELs, it's actually probably about 80% ELs and Latino students. And what they said was happening is that during the pandemic, the children were 3rd, 4th grade, actually 4th and 5th graders. They came into this middle school as 6th graders, and they didn't have a very good onboarding practice. Basically, what they wanted to do is, quote, get back to normal. But the children had been emotionally traumatized. And as a result, that they were exhibiting behaviors in which they could not regulate their emotions. They were using abusive language and also being physically abusive towards one another, towards teachers, not adhering to any kind of standards, because they had been out of school for almost 2 years. And those are really critical formative years. So recently I spent several days working with the faculty and staff to reorientate them toward trauma-informed instruction, the practices of the core competencies of social emotional learning. And then the last week I spent 2 days working with those sixth graders. And I want to tell you, I have never seen so many children that are stressed out, that are frustrated, that have anxiety attacks. And but yet we had to do engaging interactive activities to help them recalibrate and reorientate their social skills and relationships, because those formative years, they were not with their peers. They did not have a variety of adult role models. And yet the teachers thought that they can get right back into teaching, and it just didn't happen very well. So as a result of some of the activities, we integrated language and literacy. We wanted the students to write a little bit more. I have a few examples I'll be sharing with you later on. But the fact that the segue into the mind is through the heart. And that is an experience I saw firsthand just this last week with almost 400 sixth graders. We divided it into separate groups, and that was just a powerful experience, and how teachers thinking they can get back to normal where students were not ready to get back to normal academically, and the urgency and the critical need for educators to be a little bit more empathetic, compassionate, and also equipped to address some of these emotional trauma that these students, all of our students, have gone through.
That's such a notable quote. I wrote it down. You said the path to the head is through the heart, and that's um, just a beautiful quote. So thank you for that. Dr. Margarita Calderon, would you like to share as well?
Yes, I have sort of a micro experience, little story to tell. We've been observing teachers, as I mentioned. We're coaching them, and we go into the classroom for 15 minutes to observe how they pre-teach vocabulary using the 7 steps, which I'm sure you and others are familiar with, those 7 steps. But what is happening now is that the teachers actually set up with some of the social emotional or social, we call them social norms, and how to conduct during the 7 steps, how to practice with a peer during step 6. They need to use the word 10 times or so in a sentence, in their own sentence. And so they prepare the students on how to be respectful, responsible, and most of all, how to keep on trying. If they get stuck, they have to keep on trying. They can't give up. And so these are some of the things that we observe. So when the camera zooms in on different students, pairs of students, when they're working together, we see them how they are trying really hard to stay engaged, to do their task. And just like in pairs or cooperative learning, the students that work together, think together, learn more together. So they're learning vocabulary, they're learning how to work together, they're learning the content. There's just a lot of learning going on in those 60 seconds. It's only 60 seconds for step 6, and it's fabulous to see that.
Yeah, and I really would like to add that there is a silver lining around this pandemic, because in working with Margarita on the virtual coaching, I mean, we can coach 8 teachers and also give them feedback in one day. In person, that's really difficult to do. But at the same time, she has really designed this virtual coaching platform in which there is only one skill, one strategy, in this case, the 7 steps, in which the teacher sets up their cameras, usually in their laptop or their computer, where we can both see not only the teacher teaching, but also the classroom interaction, and then have a quick turnaround time in which they receive the feedback, just a powerful coaching strategy that I think it's, we just need to really advocate for that a little bit more, because teachers only are concerned about that one strategy, not all the other things that we look at when we evaluate teachers. So I thought that was pretty effective and very powerful resource for even administrators.
When I read work on research for vocabulary, it's often usually Dr. Beck and McGowan and their colleagues. But I also see yours, actually, 7 Steps, as cited most often besides theirs. I'm like, oh yeah, I know who she is. So let's move to talking about your book. Let's talk about chapter 1. Can you define SEL for listeners and why we should teach it to long-term English learners?
Mhm. I'll
Right.
let Hector start with that.
Well, I'm actually going to share screen, because it's just as much as information as well as visualization. What does it look like? We really do, I think, do SEL injustice by trying to explain it, but actually seeing it and experiencing it is where I think, the rubber meets the road. So in this case, the question is, what is social and emotional learning? And I want to emphasize the fact that these children have this visual has a very powerful message. First of all, it's a very diverse group of youngsters, diverse group, and not just one particular population. SEL applies across the board. Sometimes we think in certain circles that, well, we got to fix those kids, those poor kids, or this population or that population, or, we have to help them regulate their emotions. But what we're missing the mark is that creates a very segregated and inequitable cultural environment regarding SEL. And that's where SEL is getting a bad rap. But here, these children are not only putting their hands in the circle, as you can notice, it's a very diverse group. And when I share this with faculty and staff, I say this did not happen by accident. It really requires adult facilitation skills and adult understanding of the impact that when you create a learning environment that brings children together to interact, that is SEL in practice. Just like Margarita's talking about, that's step 6. Children need to learn how to ping pong, how to share, how to listen. There's so many social and emotional skills that go into a simple focus on vocabulary that teachers miss that opportunity. It's not about just get together with a friend and then, share the vocabulary. It's facilitating the possibility of your English learners being paired intentionally with your English dominant students, helping the English dominant students learn compassion, learn empathy, learn inclusion. And when that does happen effectively, there's a lot of bonding that occurs. And so when we look at children that bring, they're who they are, and they bring what they have to the classroom, and when teachers can facilitate that interaction, there is a lot of joy at all grade levels, not just elementary, but even in high school. So we have the traditional, or at least the framework, what we call the castle wheel, that focuses on that self-awareness. And there's a definition of that there, but that self-awareness is the point of departure. Is we were born into a culture, we were born into a language, but at the same time, it's also that self-management, being able to regulate. And traditional teaching styles, it's very hard to change, but our children demand that. So it's not whether or not we feel comfortable in teaching the traditional way and getting back to normal, it's whether or not we can adapt to the current needs and demands of children. The social awareness, teaching them children how to value diversity and how to be more inclusive, the relationship skills. When I meet with students, I ask students, tell me a little bit about what are the things that really bother you the most and the areas you need the most help. Number 1, the students say, we want to make friends. We're scared to death. We don't know how. And in the same breath, they always say, adults don't help us. Adults don't help us. So they sit there and suffer in silence. So those relationship skills, it's not only about the students, but it's about adult ability to help facilitate and also themselves to establish positive working relationships with their colleagues. Now, those four core competencies, the first two are intrapersonal, the blues are interpersonal, and the green go together, the blue and the red go together to help us make responsible decisions that are in the best interest of children. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means when it comes to actually academic integration. So that's just kind of like a 30,000 foot definition of SEL.
Yeah, and just to add to that and to connect to instruction, going back to the 7 steps and step number 6, when teachers become aware of all of those subcomponents of SEL, then they have a clearer picture as to why it is so important to set up instruction at the beginning. But also when you get to spots like step number 6, this is where we want to observe the children or the big students in high school be civil to each other, learn to be civilized, learn to empathize, while they are also being very mindful of all those cognitive processes that are going in their minds.
Yeah, it's just going back to that castle framework. It just makes social emotional learning so clear because there's all these like thousands of things to think about. It's just the 5 competencies of social emotional learning, and I love the way you integrate it right there with your 7 steps. It's about, yes, we have strategies and protocols to help students interact because students who work together learn together, but we can't just say, okay, turn and talk and then do this. We have to actually teach the human interaction skills that they need, and this is where CASO comes in. Right? Let's talk about why should we teach social emotional learning to long-term English learners?
Oh, that's a toughie. Well, just think of long-term ELs. They have been in school since kindergarten, first grade. They have been totally ignored. They haven't been taught well. The quality of instruction hasn't been there. Once they were labeled immediately, first grade, second grade, they were already long-term ELs by then. And so they've had to deal with this heavy weight of knowing that they're not as good as everybody else, that they'll probably won't do well in life, might not even graduate from high school. I mean, and so others stay away from them. The relationships are not happening, and they no longer know how to behave. In fact, unfortunately, some of them find friends in the wrong places because they're so isolated. And so, that's where my heart goes out to the long-term ELs.
Absolutely. You know that I had mentioned earlier about intentionally pairing students together. I've been in classrooms where teachers go, okay, get together with a partner. Half of the class will get together with their buddies and the other half will just sit there. And then they become the victims. Those students are just basically looked at as, well, they don't want to participate in education. Well, it's a deficit in terms of facilitation skills on the part of teachers. And so when we look at teaching long-term EL social emotional skills, that's just half the picture. It's teaching all students, not just fixing those LTELs to, excel academically, but it's really the fact that a classroom culture and environment impacts the level of motivation for students to want to participate. and to feel safe. So when we oftentimes notice that your EL students are literally suffering in silence, they're sitting there, they're quiet. I've heard teachers say, well, they're good kids. They just sit back there and, they don't cause a problem. Well, it is a big problem because they're not even learning. They're not even engaged. And the more that the teacher ignores them, the more that their peers will ignore them, their English-speaking peers. So we really look at the complete picture of how SEL can benefit all students, not just your LTELs. But your LTELs also need that extra opportunity to develop self-confidence, that extra opportunity to experiment with language, not only in an academic forum, but also in a social context. And this is where we look at, are they inviting these students into a social context in which they can experiment with language? Can they experiment with relationships and learn another culture? But the more that we segregate them or allow them to be segregated, then the least opportunities they have to really learn the dominant culture, or in this case, maybe a school culture and climate, and begin to be more confident in participating and engaging not only in academic activities, but also school-related events. So I'm going to tell one story, and this is Loudoun County. Margarita had a terrific contract with Loudoun County for many years, and they implemented the Excel strategies, the language and literacy implementation. But there was an assistant principal there that was really concerned, dedicated and committed to implementing the strategies in all of the ESL and content area classes. But what happened was there were a group of seniors, and she said that this happens frequently, that they not only did not participate in any kind of senior project as a part of their graduation requirement, but also they weren't participating in the prom. And of course, the superficial perception is, oh, they don't want to, they don't want to engage. No, they did, but they're scared to death and they didn't have the resources. So without adult guidance, they continue to not be engaged. So basically, she discovered that some of these students are very talented artists, an amazing group of youngsters that had this impressive ability to do artwork. So they latched on to these projects on school beautification that was amazing. And I'm going to show a quick picture of that school beautification project. So they started decorating the hallways, the restrooms, even painting the benches in the courtyard. I was stunned by the magnitude of this project and how this impacted on the students. And so you can see here, this students started painting the Office of Safety and Security. It says, whenever we begin to feel as if we can no longer go on, hope whispers into our ears to remind us that we are strong. Look at the artwork, look at the graphics. Also in the cafeteria, it says, throw kindness around like confetti. Unbelievable. And the number of students that really participated. We are all stars, but we must learn how to shine. And the boys' bathroom, when you feel like quitting, think about why you started. Also, the girls, the cafeteria girls' bathroom, mirror, mirror on the wall, there's a leader in us all. And then also kindness changes everything. So these are the things that they did as just by one administrator, one person connecting them to a senior project. The courtyard beautification was outstanding. And it's just really impressive as to the impact it made. As a result, they were able to raise funds to pay for their prom outfits, and they went to the prom. I mean, it brings tears to me just thinking, isn't that right, Margarita? When we heard that story, it's like, yes, academics, but also the social emotional context is so critical. And they were so motivated. Oh, it was beautiful.
Yes. In addition, there's a teacher there, the ESL teacher, and we interviewed her, and we asked her, how do you get your newcomers to graduate in 4 years in this high school? And she said, well, we have this intervention, we have that and that and that. She said, but I reach out to my colleagues, the other teachers, to help them understand what it means to be a newcomer. And she says, not only that, she says, I had to become a cheerleader for them. I had to cheer them on and show the other teachers how to be cheerleaders for newcomers. So that's something else that they're doing. They're being cheerleaders for their newcomers, and it's fantastic. So they do graduate. They get excited, they're motivated, and that's what they need. That's what they need, lots of love.
So thinking about the connection between both of your stories is that SEL is not just raising students' ability to engage with school, it's the equity issue, right? It's helping us see kids differently so they can participate, so we can draw on their skill sets, where they can beautify their school, where when we make them feel comfortable, they're going to graduate in 4 years. Right? And so this is the connection. It's not just we want kids to develop these social emotional skills. We want students to have the most equitable learning experiences, and SEL is part of that. I noticed in your slide you also talked about culturally responsive instruction is so connected to social emotional learning.
Yeah, I do have a visual for equity, and there's been a lot of debate, not only in the definition, but we kind of beat the drum on equity is this and equity is that, and yet we walk into the schools where, quote, equity, we emphasize equity and access, but we're not providing support. So just throwing kids into AP classes or trying to, mainstream kids prematurely, then what happens is that they eventually get lost, or they eventually drop out, or they eventually lose the motivation. But when we provide the support, and this is one visual that really, to me, brings it home, because it's not only about talking about equity and access, but it's about engagement. It's about engagement. It's about giving students opportunities to participate in different forums. Sometimes I see at the national news level, this Down syndrome child makes the cheerleading team. Yeah, of course, but it was so emotional. But also all children that are maybe even least likely to participate in the social context, but they need to be invited. They need to be brought in. They need to be, instead of being competitive and individualistic, it is a collective form in which students thrive when they feel safe, when they feel included. I can be a pitcher, even though I don't know how to pitch, or I can play first base, or I can bat. The fact that they get that opportunity to participate and engage, not just athletically, but also in the classroom. Margarita has this numbered heads together. Oh my God, that is SEL at its best, where students will construct questions based on the Bloom's taxonomy, and maybe a team of 4 or 5. Every single one of them needs to know what the questions and the answers are. And everyone has a number, and she calls a number, and you don't know who's going to be the spokesperson, rather than choose the one that's the most proficient, choose a leader in your group. It is really kind of a random thing. But the fact is that they all have to prepare each other to represent the group. To me, I was stunned. The first time I saw that, I said, wow, that is one of the most powerful SEL practices I've ever seen. And inclusion also, even if the student is an EL, the rest of the team helps them with the language to represent the group. The first time I really saw that, I saw Margarita, oh my God, this is just really amazing. There's so much SEL into this thing. We just need to call it out so everybody understands. There's language and literacy and academic focus. Yes, it is social and emotional. It's not just cooperative learning, but it's engaging, responsibility and equitable.
Right. It's collaborative. It's it's inclusive. So you talked about that as a strategy. Can we move to chapter 3, which is talking about how do we integrate SEL into our instruction?
Well, I think we gave you a couple of examples, the one that Hector just talked about, and then I gave the 7 steps. Every inch of the way, everything that we do in class has a space, has a spot where we can teach something. As a follow-up to the numbered heads together that Hector was sharing, right after they write their questions and one team calls a question and then the other teams have to answer. Right after when they stand up to answer, one person from the team that wrote the question takes notes. How does that one student answer? And they record all the positive things. Whether, oh, you answered in a complete sentence. I love the way you used here 2 words twice. You started your answer with nevertheless. And so they give positive feedback to all the ones that were randomly selected. And so they have to stand up and use academic English, of course, but getting feedback from the team teaches the team members how to give feedback in a very positive way and to be very cordial to their peers. And of course, they know that they're going to give them feedback as well later on. So they're definitely going to be very nice to each other. But it's a teaching situation. It's a moment to teach them that they can do this. They can use positive speech. They can be empathetic. They can be cordial. They can be forgiving. All those things that we want students to learn how to do.
I liked how you said, let me say it in a different way. You said every single opportunity to teach is an opportunity to integrate SEL as well, right? So I'm thinking about right now, I'm working with my 6th graders and 8th graders and they're writing children's books. And sometimes I'll have students turn to their partner and read the section that they just wrote. And then I feel like when I'm most aware, I'll ask the students to say, please find the most descriptive sentence and share with your partner why you like that sentence, right? And that just changes, that makes the writing more authentic for students because they know there's an audience, but it makes that they feel really great that they are celebrated and lifted, but also it's teaching students, oh, this is how you interact with people. When you look at someone's work, you first praise their work.
Oh, that's excellent. Lovely. Yes, that's SEL. Totally.
Yeah, even the point that you make about turning to a partner, to me, that is a major challenge for teachers, because what happens if you only allow students to self-select, they will segregate themselves and you defeat the whole purpose. So one of the things that I have been really impressed, especially with the integration with language and literacy, just a simple tool such as the clock buddies, where students have to get up and find a buddy that they don't know very well, or the teacher can facilitate the English dominant with the English language learner or the struggling learner. So you don't have social segregation even within the classroom. But there's another tool, it's called the Academic Vocabulary Buddy. And Margarita and I were in a community in Milwaukee, and we were walking around the school and visiting classrooms, and there was a lot of challenges. This was high school, right? Well, I happened to walk into a classroom, and students were in all the other classrooms, they were arriving late, but this particular ESL classroom, 26 students were already in their seat by the time the bell rang. And as soon as the teacher said quadrilateral, they all got up and started talking according to the prompt that was on the whiteboard, just working together. It was like, magic. I said, what did you just do? And she says, well, I just had this spreadsheet where I had the vocabulary for the week. And on the right side, you can see there's a blank. So students got up, just like with a clock buddy. They say, okay, will you be my quadrilateral buddy? They put their names in that blank. Then they go to the next one, trapezoid. So they have to use that vocabulary word when they partner with their buddy. And when the teacher calls the word, then that's the buddy they have to seek out. And again, encouraging them to get to know each other. Part of that castle wheel relationship skills has to be facilitated by teachers, not find a partner or your elbow buddy. It's okay once in a while, but not all the time, because what happens, again, you have a socially segregated classroom.
One of the worst things we can do is say, go find a partner, because the kid who doesn't have a partner is going to feel really left out. And they usually go towards their friends, and then there's always a person left, and they always feel like no one likes them.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the clock buddies, but also that integration of that like quadrilateral and then buddies. So it's really helpful.
Academic vocabulary.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And they could use this with science. They could use this like,
Oh,
okay, find your
subjects.
right, find like your cyanobacteria buddies for today. Right.
Yeah.
Let's move from that broad question of SEL instruction integrated with general instruction to moving towards chapter 5, which is about reading instruction. How do we integrate quality reading instruction with SEL as a gift?
Mhm. Well, the one reading instructional strategy that has the most power and has the best research for English language learners is partner reading. After the students have practiced vocabulary in pairs, then they continue with their partner reading. By then, they have learned pretty much how to work together effectively. So when they start their partner reading, one student, let's say student A reads the first sentence and student B reads the next sentence, and then A and then B. When they get to the end of a paragraph, they stop and they summarize together. That entails going back into the paragraph, which is fine because we want them to go back and reread, don't we? We're always saying, well, you have to go back and reread and find all the important information. So together they go back into that paragraph and pretty soon start to say, okay, well, I think this is important. I think our teacher is probably going to ask about this, so we better remember that. So let's put our little summary together and then move on to the next paragraph. So there's a lot of talking. Students are not talking enough. They're not reading, of course, they're not reading enough, but they're not talking either. Everything seems to be written. Well, write your summary on the margin, or write your summary on a piece of paper, or, do a drawing or something. If they're not articulating those summaries, the new vocabulary, the content and the concepts that they're reading about, it's not going to stay in their little old heads or in their big heads, and it will disappear. And so talking is very much a part of that social discourse that they need to develop. But now we're combining with reading, we're combining content, cognitive processing, metacognitive processing, as well as language. And all of that means that they're applying a lot of SEL competencies. In order to do higher level metacognitive processing with a peer verbally, it entails a lot of SEL competencies. And so that's a perfect example. And that's why when teachers use partner reading with summarization after each paragraph, they see that the students accelerate their learning exponentially, but they also learn to read. They learn to read closely, reading comprehension with depth of comprehension, not just superficial reading. Unfortunately, in the past few years, as we all know, in the past few years, students have not really been taught to read with comprehension. They read fast and we time them, or they read superficially and they fill out worksheets, right? But do they really process the information? Do they really retain that information? No. And so reading has to take a very different course at this point in time. We know it's not just for long-term ELs or newcomers or English learners, multilingual learners. It's every student in the classroom, because this year every student is a SIFE, student with interrupted formal education.
Wow.
And the one thing that they're lacking is reading skills. Reading skills. And if every teacher would apply partner reading, summarization, even in high schools, then that would work really well. And I have another little story from Loudoun County, our favorite high school. The AP teacher, the advanced placement teacher, who only had 2 English learners, but the whole class was AP. They always did partner reading and summarization. And guess what? They aced the SAT scores. They got great grades. It was just fabulous, fabulous. So it's for all students, all grade levels.
Right. And it's really for all content areas, because it's really, like, if you think about reading, you didn't say that protocol is not just for reading for like English class. It's for science class. When you read a science article, when you read an art critique, when you read like an article from a designer, like, you can really use that. The goal of having students read to understand, but applying that strategy of partner reading, and then it adds the extra benefit of SEL all together into that. Yeah.
I want to share with you what it looks like. Here is a sample of adults learning how to do partner reading. I think we realize that you can't just tell adults that students have to partner read if they don't practice as well. And that's a really big challenge, because if they're not comfortable with it, it's just not going to happen in the classroom. And so the more opportunities. This is a picture of high school students doing partner reading. And at first, this particular situation, the students did not want to do that activity. And before you know it, once they got to know each other and broke down those barriers, they realized that it is interdependent. And that's not the culture that we teach in the classroom. It's very independent, competitive, and in many cases just centered on the individual learner. So Margarita and I traveled to Saudi Arabia, and we did some work in Saudi Arabia. And here are some Saudis doing partner reading. I don't have any pictures of the women because they didn't let us take pictures in there, but these are all of the curriculum coordinators, the academic leaders throughout the country. We had an opportunity to work with them, and Margarita was working with the ladies, and I was working with the men. So yeah, it is a powerful strategy. It's done at all levels internationally.
I want to reference Dr. Elaine Marshall's work. Elaine Marshall, who works with SLIFE students, and she talks about a lot of students who are multilingual students come from community-based cultures, right? Collectivist cultures. And instead of where we say, okay, the culture of our school is you read independently, you write independently. Why don't we mirror our reading instruction, writing instruction to match what they're used to, where they read, where they collaborate together. And so what a perfect way to honor students' cultures as well. Speaking of writing, which is chapter 6, can you talk about how can we integrate writing and SEL together to expedite learning?
Mhm. Selamem shows. It's the same thing, es lo mismo. Right, right. And so we're taking a pair of students from vocabulary to reading. Now it's time to write. And pairs of students, or even in teams of 4, they can draft something through a round table of writing, write around. And after they draft, thank you, each student will contribute to this team paper. And once they complete about a whole page, then they move on to editing and revising. But here is where they learn how, again, all those competencies, because they need to know that everyone is collaborating. You can't really pass. You have to contribute. You have to be resilient and add something. If, the newcomer has trouble thinking of something that he or she read, then the teacher can either provide a table tent with some of the words that they'll be needing, or give permission to the newcomer to even copy what the previous student has written, just to make sure that they're contributing. And then they come up with a nice long draft.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I feel so affirmed as a teacher. This is exactly the practice that I do when students learn content. Let's say they're learning about the Industrial Revolution. I share, we'll walk through a video together about Industrial Revolution. I'll give them a writing prompt, and students have to work together to write to answer that prompt. And so what I'll say is like, whoever has the idea does not get to write that idea down. Their partner has to write that idea down. So that partner is getting that writing experience, but that partner is also getting to synthesize information. Because often we'll say, before I use this strategy, it was like, okay, go co-write your paragraph without structuring at the interaction at all, and only the most competent student would be writing the whole thing. And I was like, oh no, I need to really restructure this. And so that's what you're really talking about. It's co-writing just like co-reading, structuring it to make it collaborative and not competitive.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Individual accountability. This is where the individual accountability comes in, as well as team accountability. And that's why we call them teams. We don't call them groups. It's not a group. A group could be anything, somebody standing on a corner.
Right.
But a team, they're trained to win. I'm thinking of a football team, baseball team. They are highly trained. They practice a lot. They're prepared. And that's what makes a winning team, because everybody wins, individuals as well as the teams.
Right.
So that's how the writing, yeah, thank you. So this is what the writing looks like. And as you can see, they're editing strategies. For instance, on the right, you'll see that the first word of every sentence has been boxed so that they can see if there's a lot of repetition. Sometimes the students will start out every sentence with the, or they. They need to become accustomed to use more tier 2 words like additionally, furthermore, subsequently, moreover. And once they box, they go back and then they change for one of those tier 2 words. But Hector, you want to tell them about the revision? Look at the green spot there.
Yeah, this is a cut and grow. So as the students participate in the write around, then they can go back and do the editing, and by cutting after a sentence in which they feel they can add additional information. So they literally cut below the sentence add a green sheet, and then they can add additional information. They can cite research, they can refer back to the source, whatever it is kind of cut and grow your document and then tape it back on. And of course, ultimately they will have a finished product. But here's one that I think you'll enjoy. This is from Saudi Arabia. These are all of the academic leaders throughout the country that they were thrilled by this ride around. And I hate to say it, but the ladies had a pretty impressive the one on the left are the men's, and the one on the right, I don't know, Margarita, I don't know what you did there, but they were very creative.
Yeah, women, women always want to outdo whatever they do. Yeah, it was interesting because we weren't even observing each other. One was on one floor, the other group was on another floor, but we could hear the excitement. We could hear the guys, and I'm sure they could hear us ladies, women, as they worked on all of these strategies in preparation to go back and do some training in their own regions.
Well, this has been, again, always such a practical conversation. Every time you come along, Dr. Margarita Calderon, you just make it so practical. But Dr. Hector, your visuals have been so helpful in really coming alive, showing us what SEL and language instruction really looks like for long-term English learners. This is going to be a very practical conversation and with the visuals, so thank you. Let's end the podcast with this. What is one way we can start integrating SEL with language instruction that you recommend, a small step for teachers that they can do tomorrow?
Well, I think the first thing is to learn what SEL is. We met with a school district, brand new to us. And the first thing they kept asking throughout all the different roundtables, well, what is SEL? And it's important because everyone has sort of a different interpretation of this huge elephant. And so they need to spend time figuring out what is SEL. Then they also need to look at the instructional programs that they have, because if they want SEL to work, then where are they going to integrate this into the strategies? And what kind of instruction is going on in the classroom? If a teacher in high school is only lecturing, where can you put SEL, right? Or if the students in elementary school are mainly on the computers, where can you put SEL? So those are some of the points of departure, I think.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And I do think that during the summer break, school for the most part is over. This is a great time to reflect on your own practices and your own skills. And it's not about stopping doing what you're doing and doing something completely different. It's about enriching what you are doing in the context of student relationships, from student to student. How can we increase a student opportunity to speak to each other, to articulate their learning, their understanding, practice language, and also student to adult relationships is also very important. We need to move away from this command and control mentality that has been embedded in our educational system for centuries, and move into a more engaging, interactive, and even a compassionate learning environment, because our children need us. Our children need those adult role models that show that they really care about them and that they are patient and relationships are restorative. So if a child has an emotional outburst, we tend to be punitive and exclude them and punish them and suspend them or refer them. But what we want to do is to practice that sort of the trauma-informed education so that we can be proactive, first of all, and strengthen relationships, help them understand that, we're in this together. And if there is a sort of a misstep, we restore the relationship. We repair the harm. We don't punish the child that perhaps has not been able to practice regulating their emotions. And we facilitate conversations. And that's a whole different skill set, but it can be sort of evolved gradually, and teachers can gradually introduce that within their instructional framework. But this is what the children need. It may not be what adults always feel comfortable with, but the children need that, especially now.
Right, they really do. So I'm going to say thank you with closing with these two words. I'm going to use your two words that you've said, restore and enrich. So your book really is about restoring equity for English learners through SEL and language instruction. And you are helping us enrich our practice through your book and definitely through this conversation. So Dr. Margarita Calderon and Dr. Hector Montenegro, muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti, como siempre.
Un hug, un abrazo.
Y un beso.
Un abrazo fuerte, gracias.